From a freight train that derailed solely because of heavy rainfall, all the way to two commuter trains in India that crashed head-on, here are some of the most spectacular train derailments and accidents ever caught on camera. Let's continue with a shocking incident that occurred on September 21st, 2022, in Colorado. On that day, a tram in the city of Aurora derailed, spectacularly and with serious consequences. Entering a curve that must not be taken at more than 16 kilometers per hour, the train flew into it at nearly 63. The tram jumped off the tracks, the first two cars were flung onto the street, and the rear cars derailed shortly afterward as well. 24 passengers were on board, 3 had to be taken to the hospital, but luckily there were no serious injuries. It quickly became clear the driver was at fault. After the accident, the operating company immediately implemented new safety measures, a dramatic reminder of how dangerous human error can be in public transportation. Not far from Colorado, in Ohio, a freight train was rolling through the city at around 6 in the morning on May 28, 2019. It was carrying fruit, construction materials, and hazardous chemicals. But then something serious happened. The engineers noticed the first car beginning to wobble and immediately pulled the emergency brake. The train came to a stop, but not at all the way they had hoped. Surveillance cameras filmed the train leaping off the tracks at full speed. Sparks flew as the brakes locked. A white car jumped off the tracks, triggering a chain reaction and dragging more cars with it. Many of the derailed cars were refrigerated wagons. One can imagine that some local supermarkets waited in vain for their fruit and vegetables that day. Emergency crews arrived quickly. Fortunately, the hazardous material cars were farther back in the train and remained intact. Only a small amount of diesel leaked from the cooling units. No one was injured, but the damage was enormous. According to the accident report, the total costs were over $2.2 million. Around $500,000 for damaged tracks and about $1.7 million for materials. The cause of the accident: a poorly lubricated journal in the suspension. Let's continue in a megacity that probably very few of you know, Hyderabad. The Indian metropolis depends heavily on reliable public transportation. On November 11th, 2019, 2 passenger trains collided head-on on the same track, and surveillance footage shows the moment of impact. Miraculously, there were no serious injuries. One of the trains was moving significantly faster when they hit each other without braking. Rail cars jumped off the tracks, a man staggered in the doorway, pulled himself up and jumped off just in time. Everyone else followed. Fortunately, the speed was well below average. According to reports, one train had run a stop signal. The switch was probably not reset in time. One of the engineers was trapped for 8 hours in the deformed cab, but was eventually rescued. Brazil has more than 29,000 kilometers of rail lines, among the top 10 worldwide. For comparison, the United States ranks number 1 with more than 250,000 kilometers. One thing is clear: the more trains on the tracks, the more likely accidents become. That was also the case on October 27th, 2022 in Sao Paulo, when a freight train derailed due to technical defects. Fortunately, no one was injured when the heavy train tore itself off the rails. Official information is scarce, but the most likely cause was a broken track. According to the US Federal Railroad Administration, around 15% of all derailments are caused by damaged tracks or faulty welds. And once a train hits a broken rail, nothing can prevent what follows. Thailand's rail network is much smaller than Brazil's, with just over 4,300 kilometers. But for travelers, the system is still ideal, though not free from incidents. On June 30th, 2022, a passenger train was traveling from Map Cabau towards Saraburi province. But in a curve that looked harmless, things suddenly got dangerous. An uneven weight distribution nearly caused the train to tip over. Reports say the cargo was improperly secured, and when the train entered the curve, the right side leaned dangerously. Fortunately, no passenger cars tipped over and no one was injured. It remains unclear what exactly the massive concrete piece being transported was. Perhaps a component for a larger project. Next, we come to one of the saddest days in recent German history. On June 3rd, 1998, one train was travelling its usual route from Munich to Hamburg. On board were more than 280 passengers. It was a calm, routine trip, the train speeding through northern Germany at around 200 kilometers per hour. No one could have imagined that this ride would end in catastrophe. At 10:59 a.m., just past the town of Eschede, the unthinkable happened. One of the cars derailed suddenly. Within seconds, more cars were ripped off the tracks, smashed into each other, and crashed into a bridge, which collapsed under the force and crushed several parts of the train. What at first seemed like a technical malfunction later turned out to be a tragic chain reaction. A piece of a wheel rim had come loose and triggered the fatal events. 101 people lost their lives that day, and more than 100 others were severely injured. The Eschede train disaster remains the deadliest in the history of Deutsche Bahn, and a symbol of how quickly cutting-edge technology can turn into deadly danger. Almost exactly 10 years later, another train accident occurred in the United States. On January 7, 2008, a tornado swept over a Union Pacific line near Harvard, Illinois. It destroyed houses, uprooted trees, and, most dramatically, struck a moving freight train. Footage from inside the train shows the wind intensifying, trees bending, debris flying. Then the tornado ripped several train cars off the tracks. As if that weren't enough, the rear section of the train continued moving forward without braking, straight into the locomotive. A load of oil leaked and could only be contained after hours. The nearby town of Lawrence had to be evacuated. Although the tornado was classified only as a weak EF0, this incident clearly shows the destructive power even small tornadoes can unleash, especially when hazardous materials are involved. Let's continue to Agua Branca, which translates to white water, but is also the name of a small town in Brazil. The town was founded by migrants in the 1970s, and the local rail line brought economic growth, especially through the paper industry. But years later, a catastrophe would occur on this route. On February 21, 2021, a collision between two trains occurred near São Pedro, apparently because no one took the emergency signal seriously. A video shows a train speeding past while a faint siren can be heard. But who was supposed to hear it? The other train was already far too close. A photo taken afterwards shows the destroyed front of the train, crushed like a soda can. Not much is known about the accident, but the likely cause was a brake or switch malfunction. A very similar accident happened in the early morning of June 14, 2006, near Kismet in California. At the center were two freight trains of the BNSF Railroad Company that nearly collided head-on. The northbound train actually had the right-of-way and passed a green signal. Everything seemed fine. But shortly before entering a siding, the crew suddenly saw the lights of an oncoming train. The signal switched to red at the last second. Too late. The two trains collided at about 35 kilometers per hour. The camera footage ends abruptly. A blue screen appears while the sound of the impact can be heard. Attentive viewers can see that the engineer of the southbound train jumps from the cab at the last moment. The cause? The southbound train had run through a stop signal. Thankfully, no one was injured. Still, the incident shows how quickly small errors can lead to fatal consequences. For the next accident, we return to the United States, where trains seem to derail constantly. More precisely, we head to the Mississippi River, the second longest river in North America. In Lee County, Iowa, there is an especially tricky rail section running directly along the riverbank. And on November 13, 2021, a bizarre mix-up happened right there. A towboat operator made a serious mistake, and a train derailed. Several coal cars toppled over after colliding with the bow of the towboat. Around 5,300 litres of diesel spilled onto the tracks and into the river, along with several tons of coal. An environmental disaster. The investigation was anything but professional. In an interview, investigators seriously asked the train engineers what role they played in steering the vehicle, to which one of the engineers dryly replied, "You just sit there, you can't steer anything. The train goes wherever the rails go." They say there are no stupid questions, but we'd say this comes pretty close. On October 9th, 2006, a dramatic accident occurred in Texas. A freight train with 3 locomotives and 115 cars was headed toward Amarillo, while on the same line, a loaded coal train with 4 locomotives approached from the opposite direction. At 7:30 p.m., the coal train crew noticed that the switch was set incorrectly, not to the main track but to a siding that was already occupied with cars. An emergency brake was applied at the last moment, but it was too late. The trains crashed at around 50 kilometers per hour. 17 coal cars and several cars on the siding derailed. The cause was quickly found. A yard worker had forgotten to reset the switch after a maneuver. But the engineer, conductor, and dispatcher were also held partly responsible. The damaged locomotive was later repaired and returned to service. And that was our video for today. Let us know in the comments which accident shocked you the most. See you next time. But we'd say this comes pretty close. On October 9th, 2006, a dramatic accident occurred in Texas. A freight train with 3 locomotives and 115 cars was headed toward Amarillo, while on the same line, a loaded coal train with 4 locomotives approached from the opposite direction. At 7:30 p.m., the coal train crew noticed that the switch was set incorrectly, not to the main track but to a siding that was already occupied with cars. An emergency brake was applied at the last moment, but it was too late. The trains crashed at around 50 kilometers per hour. 17 coal cars and several cars on the siding derailed. The cause was quickly found. A yard worker had forgotten to reset the switch after a maneuver. But the engineer, conductor, and dispatcher were also held partly responsible. The damaged locomotive was later repaired and returned to service. And that was our video for today. Let us know in the comments which accident shocked you the most. See you next time.